Daphne, Velma, Fred, Shaggy, and Scooby Doo stood at the end of the dock. "It's so pretty here," Daphne said with a happy sigh. The waters of Lake Oshawana shimmered in the late morning sun. Trees lined and curved shore, and overhead white clouds billowing like towering castles in the crystal blue sky. 3 geese glided in for a landing on the dock's railing. "Perfect," Fred agreed. Velma nodded. "I can't think of a better place to learn to sail." "I'm so glad someone slipped the sailing school advertisement under my door." She took a folded piece of paper from the pocket of her skirt, unfolded it, and read it out loud. "Breezy Winds Sailing School. Learn the basics of sailing in 1 week. Enjoy a beautiful lakeside experience with skilled instructors. Like, at least this will be one place with no monsters, ghosts, or vampires," Shaggy said. He had already rolled up his pants and was sitting with his legs dangling in the water. Scooby sat beside him, splashing his paws in the water, too. "Rat's right, Ruby Rear." Shaggy saw something floating in the water and reached out to scoop it up. "Yuck," he said. "It's like a piece of green rubber or something." He looked around for a trash can, but he didn't see one, so he stuffed the scrap into his pocket. That at the moment, a man in his 20s rolled onto the dock. "Hi guys," he greeted them. "I'm Breezy Winds, owner of this sailing school. I was so glad when you called to sign up for classes." "We read your ad, and it looked like fun," Velma told him. Breezy smiled at them. "Ready to start?" "Sure," Daphne agreed. "But are we the only ones taking the class?" "I like to keep my classes down to 4 pupils," Breezy replied. Scooby cleared his throat loudly. "Rem?" "You mean like 5, Shaggy corrected Breezy. Breezy stared uncertainly at Scooby-Doo, then he shrugged. "Yeah, 5, whatever you say." The gang followed Breezy along the shore, to where 3 small boats lay on the sand. "These are called sunfish," he said. "They hold on to 2 passengers and have only 1 sail. I like to start students with these because they're light and easy to learn. And they're gorgeous," Daphne added. For the next half hour, Breezy showed the gang how to put the sailboats together. They set the masts in place, put the rubber, and inserted the centerboard. Breezy showed the rope knots, and they learned how to judge each way the wind was blowing. "All this learning is making me hungry," Shaggy said. "Me-roo," Scooby agreed. "You 2 can eat later," Fred told them as he dragged the boats into the water. "I want to try sailing." "Well, if you hear a loud rumbling sound, that's my stomach," Shaggy grumbled. "Mine and Scooby's." Breezy assigned Fred and Daphne to share one sailboat. He put Velma on another and Shaggy and Scooby on a third. "I'll get into my motorboat and join you," he added. The gang learned quickly and was soon gliding along the lake's surface. "Isn't this great?" Daphne said to Fred, as she held onto the sail line tightly in her hand. "It sure is," Fred agreed. Velma sailed past them smiling, and Fred waved to her. "Hey, Daph, check out Scoob and Shaggy," he said. Daphne turned and laughed. Scooby and Shaggy sailed flipped back and forth into the wind. As they spun in circles, Breezy in his small motorboat was going to help them. Fred, Daphne, and Velma sailed out to the middle of the lake. Breezy soon joined them. "Where's Shaggy and Scooby?" Fred shouted to them. "I guess they've given up," Breezy shouted back, pointing over his shoulder. Scooby and Shaggy had taken down the sail and were on the bellies paddling like 2 surfers sharing a board. The gang was still giggling at the sight of them. Then suddenly their boats began to swirl around a large circle. "Jinkies, what's happening?" Velma cried, and the center of the swirling water grew dark. Scooby and Shaggy's boat was caught in the whirlpool too. The water swept everyone around and around. "Hey, surf's up!" Shaggy shouted happily, as he and Scoob stood and surfed a riding the waves, but they instantly sat back down when they saw something coming out of the center of the whirlpool. It was something very big and ugly. "Ronster!" Scooby yelled. The slimy green lake monster rose up from the swirling vortex. It was nearly 12 feet tall, part frog, part fish, and part human. Its finny arms lashed out, whipping in all directions. One of the arms knocked Scooby and Shaggy off their boat. "Like cowabunga, dude!" Shaggy shouted as he was spinning. Water sucked him and Scooby down. In minutes, they only disappeared below the surface. "Shaggy, Scooby!" Velma cried. "Oh no!" shouted Daphne. The hideous lake monster quickly sank down into the water again. As suddenly as it begun, the lake monster stopped spinning. The gang immediately jumped into the water and began searching for their friends. Fred, Daphne, and Velma dove down deep under the water. They spotted a small light. They swam towards it, but the light went out, and they were soon lost in darkness. Fred, Velma, and Daphne managed to swim straight up. They popped their heads above the surface at the same time. Breezy extended his hand and pulled them up to his motorboat. "We've got to find Shaggy and Scooby," Daphne said, wringing water from her hair. "I have Scooby gear and lights," Breezy told them. "Let's go back to shore and get them." He took down the sails on the other boats and towed them as he raced to shore. When they neared the shore, the horrible creatures appeared on the land. They staggered toward Breezy and the gang, groaning and waving their arms. "Oh no," Fred said. "More lake monsters." Breezy cut his speed and approached cautiously. Velma had found binoculars and remote control in the case under one of the seats. She used the binoculars to study these creatures. "They are hideous," she commented, "but something about them is familiar." As she continued to watch, one of the creatures clawed at his face. Dark eyes peered out between the reedy coverings. "It's Shaggy!" Velma shouted. Breezy picked up the speed again and hurried to the dock his boat. The gang sprawled out and raced to their friends. "Ralp, Ralp!" Scooby cried. He was wrapped in so much lake grass that his shouts were hard to hear. Shaggy, too, was wrapped like a mummy in lake grass and reeds. Velma, Fred, and Daphne pulled apart their friends' wrappings, and in minutes they were free. "What happened?" Fred asked. We don't know," Shaggy told them. "They went under and it was too dark to see. Then somebody jumped us, wrapped us in this stuff, and put us in some kind of box. The next thing we knew, we were being dumped out here." Breezy Winds walked up to them. "You've discovered my secret. That is why you were the only ones here today. People don't want to be the next victim of the lake creature, so no one ever signs up for my classes." Shielding her eyes from the sun, Velma glared down at the shoreline. Sailboats were taking off from nearby docks. "Why aren't these people scared to go out?" she asked Breezy. He shrugged. "That's another sailing school. They don't seem to be bothered by the creature." The gang looked at one another. "Let's go have a talk to the owner of that sailing school," Fred suggested. They hurried down the next sailing school and they were greeted by a pretty young woman. "Hi, I'm Gail Winds." "Welcome to my sailing school," she said. "Care for a lesson?" "You might be related to Breezy Winds," Daphne observed. The woman made a fade of disgust. "Wish I wasn't. He's my little brother. He wants to be a partner in this business, but I don't let him. He's too much of a goof-off. He'd want me to do all the work while he ran off and did his sculptures. What he really wants is to be an artist." The gang told her about the terrifying encounter with the lake monster. "Breezy said he doesn't bother your students," Fred added. Why do you think that is? I have no idea, but that's his problem, not mine, Gale replied. Now, if you excuse me, I have a sailing class to run. Where is Scooby and Shaggy? Daphne asked. There they are, Velma said, pointing towards the row of circles, the lake. And they have company. Scooby and Shaggy stood outside the hot dog truck, eating one hot dog after another. As they ate, they spoke to a man who wrote everything they said down on a pad. Fred, Daphne, and Velma hurried to join them. They arrived just in time to hear Shaggy say, "The monster was like horrible, man. It grabbed us and flung us around like icky, slimy, disgusting webbed hands and what?" the man prodded excitedly. "And I'm out of hot dogs," Shaggy told him. "I don't remember things as well when I'm starving." "I need more hot dogs too," Scooby ratted. "Scooby needs another one too," Shaggy translated to the reporter, who hurried to the truck to buy more hot dogs. "What's going on?" Fred asked Shaggy. "Oh, like this reporter showed up and wants our story. He says this is the break he needs to become a top reporter, so Scooby and I were happy to talk to him, for a price, of course." Velma scratched her head. How did he know what had happened? He wondered about. "We were the only ones out there when the lake monster showed up. Remember, this had happened before," Daphne said. "Or maybe we weren't the only ones out there," Fred added. "Shaggy, you have relish on your cheek," Daphne said. "Zoinks, like how embarrassing." Shaggy replied. He pulled a tissue out of his pocket and wiped it out. The piece of green rubber he found in the water earlier fell out. Fred picked up and studied it. "Where did you get this, Shaggy?" he asked. Shaggy told him. "I think it's the time we came up with a plan," Fred said slowly. "First, let's change into our bathing suits and tell Breezy that we would like to take a late-night canoe ride." Daphne held the flashlight as Fred patted the front of the canoe and Velma patted it in the back. It was dark and quiet, and the only sound was crushing that came from Scooby and Shaggy munching on Scooby snacks as they sat in the middle of the canoe. Suddenly, the dark water began to turn. The canoe spun and the waters twirled. "Zoinks! I don't like this," Shaggy said, his mouth full of Scooby snacks. In the darkness, the creepy figure out came the lake monster began to rise. Its fin-like arms flew out from the side, seeking the next victim. "Now," Fred shouted. Daphne, Shaggy, and Velma stood and threw a large fishing net over the monster's head. The canoe rocked dangerously as they pulled the creature towards them. "We've got it!" Daphne cried. The monster was about to topple over completely. "Whoa!" everybody yelled all at once as the canoe flipped. The gang came out from the water and saw the monster floating lifelessly in the net. Velma, Fred, and Daphne dove down and came up holding a man in a scuba outfit. Fred pulled off the face mask and the culprit was revealed. "Breezy wins!" Daphne cried. She turned towards the others. "We were right." The gang figured it was Breezy based on the clues they've collected. The piece of green rubber floating in the water told them that the monster wasn't real. They also knew that Breezy Wind's own scuba equipment, which meant he was able to go underwater whenever he wanted. Velma also saw the remote control on the boat. What would Breezy need a remote control for? The gang had other suspects besides Breezy. Gale Wind's sailing school was competition for her brother. She might want to create the monster to put him out of business. The reporter might have made up the big story to boost his career. After all, he seemed to know everything there was going on, but Breezy Winds had the means and the motive. As the sculptor, he was able to create the monster out of rubber. He used the remote to activate the monster. His monster was remote rubber sculpture attached to a large fan on an underwater platform. When Breezy turned it on with his remote, the fan swirled the water. He also turned on a lift like used on most cars that brought up the monster. When Scooby and Shaggy were accidentally sucked under, Breezy quickly donned the scuba gear and grabbed them to keep them from seeing the setup below. He wrapped Scooby and Shaggy in lake grass and reeds and zoomed back to shore and left them there. "What is his motive?" Gail tipped off the gang when she said Breezy wanted to be part of her business. He opened his sailing school to show her that he could run a sailing school on his own, but he didn't do well, and he wanted to seem like it wasn't his fault and he was going out of business. He set up a monster so Gail would feel sorry for him and think the business was ruined through no fault of his own. He called a reporter and left an ad to the gang so the story would make headlines. Gail was sure to see. "I'm sorry, you guys, and especially you, Gail. Is there any way I can make it up to you?" Breezy asked. "It's okay, Breezy," Velma said. "Like, hey," Shaggy said. "That lake monster was pretty awesome. I bet people would come out and see it." "You're right. We can make them come out on sailboats and charge them," Gail said to Breezy. "What do you mean, we're partners?" Breezy asked. "Partners," Gail agreed. "Ruby, Ruby, Roo!" Scooby cheered.